Today's video is brought to you by Cars and Bids, my online enthusiast car auction site that recently sold this, and this, and this, and this, and this. Check it out at carsandbids.com. This is the new 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 6, and it's a fully electric mid-size sedan that's, well, interesting. I mean that in a good way, actually. You might think that sedans are dead, but this one has just arrived, and it's unusual and cool, and, well, it's full of quirks and features. Today, I'm going to review the Ioniq 6 and show them to you. All right, time for the quirks and features of the Ioniq 6. Now, I did already do a thorough video tour of this car, but that was a pre-production model and I wasn't able to drive it. This time, I can get behind the wheel, so I'm gonna show you all the quirks and features again and then review the driving experience. So, I'll start with the basics. The Ioniq 6 shares its architecture and its mechanicals with the Ioniq 5. That's Hyundai's fully electric crossover, and it's essentially this car in a different body for people who would prefer an SUV to a sedan, which is most people these days, but it's not like the Ioniq 6 doesn't have competition. Its closest rival is the Tesla Model 3, which is of course a tremendously popular car, and this stacks up reasonably well. The entry-level Ioniq 6 has about 150 horsepower, not much, but a 240-mile range and a starting sticker price of around $43,000, which is pretty good. The mid-level version has about 240 horsepower and up to 360 miles of range, which is impressive. And at the top of the line, you got 320 horsepower and a little over 300 miles of range. That version has a starting price of around $54,000. So everything is in the mid-$40,000 to mid-$50,000 range in this car's lineup. And like I said, that stacks up fairly well against the Tesla Model 3 with one exception. There's no performance version of this car. You can get the Tesla Model 3 Performance and do 0 to 60 in like 3 seconds. There's no Ioniq 6 that does that, at least not yet. Now, the Ioniq 6 offers standard rear-wheel drive or available all-wheel drive if you want the all-weather capabilities, and it's quite a bit longer than a Model 3, actually. This is about 191 inches long, which is about 7 inches longer than a Model 3. It's more into mid-size sedan territory than compact like the Model 3. In fact, this is about the same length as a Toyota Camry, about an inch shorter, and a Honda Accord about 3 inches shorter. So the Ioniq 6 definitely more mid-size than small. But while pricing and performance and market position seem pretty reasonable and well thought out, don't let this car fool you into thinking that it's normal, because it isn't. It is very, very quirky, starting with the key, which is this. Look closely, and it's the Hyundai logo. The Hyundai H is the key fob design, and in the negative space between the letter, you have all the key fob buttons, which is pretty clever and certainly quirky. But unquestionably, the weirdest thing about this car is the pixels. Pixels, pixels, pixels. It's a theme of the Ioniq 5 crossover, and I talked about it a lot reviewing that car, but it's a much bigger theme here. Let me show you what I mean, starting with the headlights. You can see the running lights are these square pixels. Turn on the turn signal, and they become the square pixels. You're thinking, that's not all that weird. Well, we're just getting warmed up. On the rear view mirror, more pixels. That's the turn signal, of course. Turn it on and the pixels flash. And then you get to the rear, which is the pixel Motherload. You can see a giant light bar going across the entire rear of the car, all pixels, little squares the whole way across to emphasize this design theme. The brake lights, the turn signals, the tail lights, everything lights up back here in pixels. Then you have this rather bizarre rear spoiler, kind of the Ioniq 6 ducktail that sticks up up from the sloping rear end of this car, again filled with pixels, which is odd. And then you have it on the bumper too. Its reflector and reverse lights down here are all these little square pixels. It's everywhere and back. And it doesn't just stop with the lighting. The trunk opener button, you can see, has pixels on it. You push and it pops open. Same deal with the charge port door opener, little pixels where you're supposed to press in order to get it open. Pixels, 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 a major theme of the Ioniq 6. But strangely enough, the pixels aren't the weirdest thing about the exterior of this car. That honor goes to the antenna on the roof, which is clear. Look into it, you can see the mechanical components of this antenna. You know how the Ferrari F430 has a see-through engine cover? You can see the big V8. Well, this car, it doesn't have an engine. So they figured, what could we let people see through? And the answer was the radio antenna, which is very strange. But anyway, next up, moving into the Ioniq 6, you walk up and notice the door handles are flush with the body of the car to preserve its aerodynamics, but mostly just to look cool. However, if you walk up with the key in your pocket, it senses that, and the door handles pop out as you approach the car. You don't even have to press anything, and then you can pull on the door handle and climb right in. And as you can imagine, there are some unusual quirks in here, starting with the pixels on the steering wheel. You don't have a Hyundai logo or Ioniq 6, just 4 pixels. They look, well, normal, but they aren't. You press the drive mode button to go into sport mode and the pixels turn red to confirm that you're in sport mode. Go into eco mode and they turn green temporarily to confirm you're in eco mode. These pixels aren't just static, they actually do stuff, and probably other stuff too as you drive and use this car. Kind of an interesting use of the pixels. Now, over on the passenger side of the dashboard, you got, well, more pixels, as you can see, between the climate vents, quite a few of them, but more interestingly, the dashboard has wings. You can see at the edge, wings or ears pop up from the sides of the dashboard, driver and passenger, which certainly looks weird. Not sure why they're there, but they are. Also interesting in this interior is the 2-level center console. The lower one is just a giant storage area where you can put stuff, and of course the bottom is lined with pixels. The upper one has a lot of stuff you might need. A USB port, your cup holders are here, all your window switches, your door lock button, that kind of thing. But you'll notice there's no gear selector here in the center console, and that's because it's on a stalk coming off the steering column. You can see it here, kind of a thick stalk, and the operation is unusual. You twist the end of the stalk in order to go into gear. So push it up and then you're in drive, down, and then you're in reverse. Park is a button on the end, and of course you're guided through all of this with these little pixels that tell you where to go with the stalk, because of course you are. Now, one major feature in this interior is the screens. You got a large gauge cluster screen and a center infotainment touchscreen, and they have some pros and cons. The big drawbacks of the infotainment screen in the middle, number one, it incorporates the heated seats, which is so annoying. To get your heated seat on, you got to push a screen on the climate controls. It pulls up your heated seat menu, and then you can raise or lower your heated seat temperature. It's so stupid, especially when you have so much space in the center console where you could have put heated seat controls, including where the window switches are. You could have moved those to the doors like every other car and had a simple heated seat button. It would have made so much more sense. This center screen, I also don't like the home screen, which is this, and doesn't really give you that much info, but it takes up a lot of space. It doesn't show like a functional map. It's supposed to be kind of cool and theoretical and fun, but it's not really helpful. It's definitely one of the worst home screens in all the infotainment systems. But aside from that, there's a lot to like about this infotainment system. Namely, it's very responsive. You swipe, slide, touch. It responds instantly to all your commands. Zoom on the map. It does everything you'd want, which is great. Basically smartphone responsiveness. And I like the fact that you can have 2-panel displays. So you got the radio and the map in 2 displays. You can see them both at once, and you don't have to go back to each screen in order to adjust stuff and leave where you were. That's a nice feature, and I like how configurable that is. Gauge cluster, again, also a big screen, and also some drawbacks. In this case, I think more drawbacks than benefits. The biggest is it's just not all that configurable. For this futuristic display and quirky modern car, you'd think they'd let you do more with this screen. It won't even show you the music you're listening to. You can't get that pulled up, and it also won't show you a full screen map like so many other cars do. Instead, you can only adjust a few things, and it shows up here in the center, not full screen, which is disappointing. So many other brands let you change the entire layout of this, prioritize what you want to see, your music, your phone, your map, whatever. You can't do that in this car, and that's a shame. It does, however, display acceleration in an interesting manner. You can see I accelerate and it shows these like bars that rise as I add speed. It's sort of the modern day equivalent to a tachometer, I guess, in an electric car. That's the new way of showing that, and it's kind of interesting. One other item worth noting with the screens that I do like, if you push this button here in the center control stack, the P button of the camera pops up on the screen. So if you're trying to park somewhere, you want to see the camera, but you haven't gone into reverse to bring it up automatically, that button brings it up instantly. Now, unfortunately, in this relatively low-end base model Ioniq 6, you only have that backup camera, but nicer versions have more camera technology. You should probably get those if you like your cameras. But speaking of technology in this car, despite being a relatively entry-level Ioniq 6 SE, it's got driver assist and it works great. Adaptive cruise control slows down and speeds up based on the car in front of you. That's pretty standard, but this car also has steering assist, and it'll steer you around curves on the freeway. It does a great job of doing that, keeping you in your lane, and you can be largely hands-off. The cool thing in this system is you can be working the pedals while it steers for you automatically. Virtually every other car requires you to be in full adaptive cruise mode for steering to kick in, but not here. You can have the pedals going, but the car steering, which is unusual and actually kind of nice in some situations. Really good driver assist tech, even on this relatively base model car. Now, with that said, one feature definitely missing from this relatively base model car is the blind spot cameras. In many modern Hyundai and Kia models, you put on your turn signal and a camera pops up in the gauge cluster showing you what's in your blind spot. It makes lane changes much, much easier. It's a great feature. It's not on this Ioniq 6. You got to get a nicer trim to get the blind spot cameras, and frankly, I would. They're really, really useful and worth spending a couple grand extra to get those and probably a few other features. Not having them is really a shame, and it's a great selling point of modern Hyundais and Kias. And next up, we move on to the back of the Ioniq 6, the back seat, which is frankly, it's huge. There's a ton of space back here, especially for a mid-size sedan the size of a Camry. I got like true full-size sedan legroom, knee room back here. Tall people will love the back of this car. It's quite impressive for the size segment. Headroom is a little less so. Taller people might hit their head on the ceiling due to this car's teardrop shape, but I bet you won't care because legroom is just so nice. You basically lie down back here. It's so luxurious. And the reason they're able to do that in a typical mid-size sedan footprint, it's all about packaging. There's no engine up front that kind of pushes the passenger compartment back. So they can use that space to elongate the interior and make it roomy in here. It really has a lot of space. And some other items worth pointing out. You got two USB-C ports back here to charge rear passenger devices, which is nice. And directly above that, some climate vents, which is nice to see even in this relatively low trim level car. Some rear seat dedicated climate vents, so you're not just at the mercy of the air that happens to make its way to the back seat. That's nice. Other than that, not much going on in the back seat of this Ioniq 6, although be lying back here charging your device, you won't care. But I will point out there's a distinct lack of pixels back here. So many on the outside and up front, rear passengers don't get to enjoy a pixelated experience. What a shame. And finally, we move on to the trunk, the cargo area in the Ioniq 6. You press the pixel button, trunk pops open automatically, and you got pretty good space back here, surprisingly so. Again, great packaging in this car. They figured out how to add room, add interior space where it really mattered, including the trunk, and it's decent size. You also have these little pull tabs to drop the rear seats, which is a nice convenience feature to have in the trunk. You got some big heavy item you're trying to load in, you don't want to go around to the seats and lower them. It's good to be able to do that from back here. You can lift up the floor of the trunk as well and get a little bit more storage in in here, as you can see. And if you want even more storage, you got it up front. You can open up the front trunk and there's this little storage compartment up here. Not huge, you don't have a lot of room for stuff, but you can stick some items in there if you want to. Charging cables, things like that. Now, the other thing worth talking about with this car is the design, which is rather interesting. Definitely not mainstream for a mid-size sedan, although with electric vehicles taking so many interesting design risks these days, it's not particularly unusual or weird either. This teardrop shape with that rear wing back there, it would have looked strange maybe 5 years ago, but these days it just kind of works for an electric car. They all stand out in their own ways, and this certainly does. Although you do lose some of the 80s boxy modernism you have in the Ioniq 5 crossover. The 6 is more modern, maybe a little more mainstream, and it has more of a slippery, traditional teardrop shape. The two cars definitely don't have that much in common, except for the pixels. All right, driving the Ioniq 6. This is the meat of this video, since I already did a tour before in a different video like I mentioned. Now, one other interesting thing about this Ioniq 6 compared to the other one I reviewed, this is a pretty basic model. This is an SE, low trim. It's probably a low to mid $40,000 vehicle, as opposed to usually the automakers send me the top trim, top of the line, which is great because I can show you all the quirks and features, but it's not necessarily representative of what people actually buy. And so this one in the mid-low 40s, it's been interesting to see what that is. Cloth seats, no sunroof, but you still have some nice stuff like good driver assist. The power trunk was a surprise to me. It's a relatively well-spec car, even if you get the base spec. I do wish it had more cameras. So let's talk driving experience, and I'm going to frame it with the Ioniq 5 because I think a lot of people will be considering both of these vehicles, as they well should. Mechanically, they're very similar, essentially identical, except the Ioniq 5 sits up. And to me, that's one of the weird things about this car. The 6, people don't want sedans anymore. They want SUVs. And as a result, I think the 5 is going to be a far more popular selection. However, this car has some desirable attributes, including some of its weirdnesses. I think that's going to play well with people who, I don't really want a sedan. Okay, but this one is quirky. Maybe I'll give it a shot. So how does it drive? The answer is reasonably well. Honestly, a lot like the SUV drives the Ioniq 5, which is to say, quiet, easy, reasonably powerful. This one is fairly low on power, but you can get them up to 320 horsepower, which is a pretty good figure. And of course, any version of this car has the instant torque that comes with an EV, which is nice. Tire noise, road noise is a little bit louder, but totally reasonable for a car at this price point. It feels calm and it's comfortable. It's not too sporty or harsh at all by any stretch of the imagination. If anything, it's sort of in the opposite direction where it's a little bit soft. So enthusiasts may not gravitate at least to this trim level, but you do have a nice kind of comfortable ride and feel. Now, like I mentioned before, the driver assist technology is great in this car. It does a lot of the driving for you, steering, braking, accelerating, which is also nice to see in a car at this price point. Truthfully, there's not actually that much to say about the driving experience of this car, even though that was kind of what I was most looking forward to since I had already done a tour video. The driving experience is pretty much exactly what you'd expect. It's not like fast or crazy or different in any way. It drives like a mid-size sedan. Frankly, I think it's a little bit more comfortable and a little more solid feeling than the last couple of Camrys and Accords that I've been inside. Those cars can get a little clunky and feel a little cheap, and this isn't like that, but its starting price point is also considerably higher. This is definitely on, a higher level than vehicles like that. But as kind of a slightly upscale mid-size sedan, it's a great car. Again, great interior room in here. Sitting in the driver's seat, good headroom, good legroom, knee room, all that stuff. Good visibility. You can see out despite the teardrop shape. You got big mirrors. It's a nice car. It's not a particularly exciting or crazy or thrilling car. It's more thrilling the way it looks and some of the weird things they've integrated, like the Hyundai key and all the pixels. Driving it doesn't give you that same like, whoa, what is this? Although I suspect top trims would be pretty exciting and pretty fun. They don't quite equal a Model 3 performance, but they're probably still pretty powerful. But regardless here, it's just a nice car. Not crazy, not over the top, but nice. Reasonable, comfortable, easy. It's a good car to drive and a good mid-size sedan, especially when your focus is interior room and obviously on getting a good electric car. And so that's the 2023 Hyundai Ioniq 6. 6. This is a cool car, and while I suspect that most people will instead buy the SUV version, the Ioniq 5, there's a lot to like here if you want an electric sedan, especially a cool and interesting one. And now it's time to give the Ioniq 6 a DougScore. And the DougScore is here, 56 out of 100, which puts the Ioniq 6 here against similar electric cars in the lower half against this competition. Truthfully, I like the Ioniq 6, but I'm not exactly sure what its advantages are over the Ioniq 5. The 5 costs about the same, and it has a lot more interior space for cargo and passengers, and most people will surely prefer the looks of the 5. Same deal with the Kia EV6, which is similar to the Ioniq 5 and has similar advantages. The Ioniq 6 is a great electric car for people who are dead set on a sedan, but there's a reason most automakers have gone with a crossover for their earliest electric vehicles, as most car shoppers seem to prefer SUVs these days over sedans.